The European continent is often known as one of the richest continents in the world. Based on the Human Development Index, 7 of the 10 highest ranking countries are on the European continent, and the same trend holds for the list of the world's happiest countries. On the other hand, on the border of Romania lays a country which is significantly poorer to not only to its neighbors, but it is also poorer compared to even some African countries, including Egypt, Botswana and Gabon. Once part of the Soviet Union, Moldova never fully recovered from the economic collapse of the 1990s. Widespread corruption, political instability and mass emigration have left the country stuck in a cycle of stagnation. The country was so poor to the point where its citizens were actively selling their kidneys just to earn a few $1,000s. However, things might be looking bright for the country. To really understand this topic, we might need to divide the video into several chapters. Moldova's economic history under the Soviet Union, capitalistic Moldova, the good, the bad and the ugly. Moldova in European Union, is it possible and is it worth it? Economic history of Moldova is probably the biggest reason of why it is one of the poorest countries on the continent. Before the annexation of Moldova in 1940, Moldova was part of Romania. The region's main output was coming out of agriculture sector and the area wasn't necessarily industrially highly developed. Soviet Union annexed Moldova in 1940 and introduced harsh laws and regulations regarding different industries. Now we have to keep in mind that Soviet Union acted as one entity, so Moldova had to follow the rest of the Union. Moldova adopted centrally planned economies. The local farmers were forced to give up their farms and the farms were collectivized. It is worth mentioning that even though Moldova was annexed, there was huge distrust towards it by the Soviet Union, and that wasn't necessarily beneficial to Moldova, especially when it came to 5-year plans. Lots of Moldovas were deported or killed as they were seen as collaborators and enemies of the state. Now we must remember that this very issue and developments resulting from it still plays a big part of Moldova's weak economy. The 5-year plans differed from place to place. While the Soviet Union mostly preferred developing heavy industries, it wasn't always the case when it came to different republics. For example, Russia and Ukraine had diverse economic industries. So the Soviet Union spent more and more money to develop those two republics, while on the other hand Moldova mainly remained a republic with an agricultural industry and a small light industry sector. The republics with already developing industries were incentivized to continue their growth, and republics that did not have the necessary base were not as incentivized compared to others. Moldova was prime place to develop agriculture because the region wasn't highly trusted among the Soviet Union. Thus, it wasn't necessarily seen as a safe investment place for the Union to develop heavy industries. On the other hand, while Moldova lacked natural resources, it had one of the best arable lands, which made it easier for the Union to incentivize the food production there. The Soviet Union's economy showed early signs of decline in 1970s. However, in 1980s, the economic decline was becoming more and more obvious. The living standards were quickly deteriorating. Soviet industries were not only inefficient compared to Western nations, but they were also getting more and more expensive to keep it working. On top of that, the Soviet Union was forced to keep funding its strong military to exert and maintain as much influence as possible. In the case of Moldova, the republic was already poorer compared to other highly developed republics in the Soviet Union, including Russia, Ukraine and Belarus. Moldova had one of the highest employment balances by sector in the Soviet Union, meaning that the republic was more hyper-focused on agricultural production compared to other countries. With Moldova's development, there was a one big quirk that potentially changed the course of the modern-day Moldova. As we have mentioned before, Moldova wasn't seen as trustworthy as other republics under the Soviet Union. Thus, Moldova's main industrial sector was built in Transnistria. The Transnistria region had 15% of the population of Moldova, but accounted for 40% of its GDP and 90% of the electricity production. When Moldova gained independence, all hell broke loose, which brings us to chapter 2. Moldova declared independence in 1991, but not everything went as smoothly as we would like to imagine. First things first, Moldova had to essentially revamp its economic ways. Leaving centrally planned economy and adopting market economy wasn't necessarily an easy task, considering the corruption and uncertainty in the political landscape. On the other hand, Transnistria did not want to be part of Moldova. They enjoyed having more developed region and seeked to maintain centrally planned economy. Thus, the civil war broke out. The Russian army quickly interfered and forced Moldova to give up the fight. Moldova now had to face more problems. On the first hand, they essentially had to start competing worldwide to export their products. However, on the other hand, most of their industries and energy production was coming from the Transnistria region, which made it harder for the country to recover economically. Under the Soviet Union, Moldova exported agricultural goods to other Soviet republics, and in exchange they would receive raw materials at cheaper prices, which was later used for their industrial sector. However, that was not possible anymore. The former Soviet Union countries could now export their raw materials worldwide for a much higher price. Moreover, loss of Transnistria made the exporting much harder, considering that the separatist region had the necessary infrastructures that connected Moldova to Russia, Ukraine and many other post-Soviet republics. This has led towards many other issues. Moldovan farmers could no longer afford fertilizers. In 1985, 184 kg of chemical fertilizers were used per hectare, but in 1997 that number fell to just 9 kilograms. The GDP and the industrial output was more than halved compared to 1990. On January 2, 1992, Moldova introduced the market reforms, which included price liberalization. This resulted in more than 1000% inflation in 1992 and 1993. From 1992 till 2001, the young country suffered its worst economic crisis that left most of the population below the poverty line. So to summarize everything, Moldova was now left with inefficient factories that could not compete worldwide. They also lost a decent chunk of their industrial sector alongside with important trade routes, and on top of that, they now had to deal with huge inflation issues. However, as years passed by, Moldova was doing everything right on the surface. They issued a new currency in 1993 and finally managed to stabilize inflation to some degree. However, the country was still over-reliant on Russia. Russia was the destination for more than 50% of Moldova's exports. At that time, Russia wasn't necessarily doing great in terms of monetary and fiscal policy. In 1998, Russian financial crisis sent the shockwaves through the neighborhood. Russia defaulted on the debt in 1998, and Ukraine and Moldova defaulted on the debt in the same year. However, since then, Moldova's economy had been growing to some moderate degree. The country finally managed to set up basic systems and regulations. However, the political system was getting stranger. Moldova wanted to align with the European Union, which was one of the reasons for fallout with Russia. It took Moldova's GDP per capita 20 years to finally recover to its 1990 level. Since then, Moldova had decent amounts of growth on year-to-year basis, ranging from 5 to 10%. However, there are few risks associated with the growth. One of the main problems facing Moldova is quick population loss. More and more Moldovans are emigrated to other countries, including Romania, Poland and Germany. In 1990, Moldova's population was about 3 million. However, in 2023, the number dropped to less than 2.5 million people. Mass emigration combined with the worsening birth rates is having a detrimental impact on Moldova's economy. Those leaving the countries are often the best educated and most experienced professionals, which leads to a significant brain drain. The labor force available on the market is steadily declining. By 2023, 20% of local businesses reported labor shortages. In 2022, Moldova sent application letter to the European Union, which brings us to chapter 3 about whether or not Moldova can join the European Union and if it is worth it to do so. The idea of Moldova joining the European Union is not as far-fetched as it sounds. Moldova's main export destinations mainly consist of other European Union countries like Romania, Italy, Poland, Germany and the Czech Republic. So it's possible for Moldova to benefit a lot by joining the Union. Moldova was granted the European Union candidacy status in 2022, sending a powerful signal. However, the integration in the European Union might be trickier than we think. While most of the parties support deeper integration with the Union, a sizable chunk of citizens are strongly against it. In 2024, The referendum was held in the country about whether or not Moldova should amend the constitution and add the European Union as one of the key points. The referendum barely passed though. The votes were almost evenly split, standing at 50.35% for yes and 49.65% for no. The situation is even trickier considering that Moldovans living abroad played significant part towards winning the referendum, meaning that it was entirely possible for a referendum to fail if only local citizens voted. During the presidential election, a record number of 327,000 voters cast ballots abroad in the runoff. 82% of voters from abroad favored pro-European Union candidate Maia Sandu. But inside Moldova, Stoianoglu, a former prosecutor general, obtained 51.3% of the vote compared to Sandu's 48.67%. Stoianoglu receiving significant amount of voters are one of the worst things to talk about, considering that he was against the referendum and promised a balanced relations with the European Union, United States, Russia and China. One of his other promises were about restoring the supply of cheap Russian gas. So while the pro-European politicians are currently in charge of the country's trajectory has a few associated risks. The current pro-European Union trajectory of Moldova is running on razor-thin margins, and it might be quite possible for the country to flip the course. It is also worth mentioning that during the early 1990s, one other region other than Transnistria wanted independence. The region was called Gagauzia. However, they struck a deal with Moldova. In this deal, Gagauzia would become an autonomous region in this country and would have influence on local laws, regulations and foreign policy of Moldova. Unfortunately, this makes it even trickier for Moldova to join the European Union, because Gagauzia is leaning on the pro-Russian side. In 2014, Gagauzia held a referendum about further integration with the European Union. In this referendum, around 97% of the people in the region voted against the further integration. But even if Moldova maintains the same trajectory, could the country essentially join the European Union, and what are the risks and benefits for it? For Moldova to join the European Union, it will have to meet strict standards and guidelines. The country will have to adopt more and more regulations and prepare the economy for the Union. For one, Moldova will most likely have to meet the Copenhagen criteria. The Copenhagen criteria are the rules that define whether a country is eligible to join the European Union. The criteria requires that a state has the institutions to preserve democratic governance and human rights, has a functioning market economy and accepts the obligations and intents of the European Union. On the other hand, Moldova will most likely have to prepare their economy for more laws and regulations. Moreover, the country will have to make European Union appear more favorable towards the local citizens. If Moldova joins the European Union, there are few pros and cons that would come with it. Firstly, Moldova could gain access to bigger market. Joining the European Union will make it easier for Moldovan companies to trade within the Union. On the other hand, more and more European Union funds will be allocated towards Moldova so that they could develop and fund their own industries. However, there are always some risks associated with such issues. For one, Moldova's companies might not be as competitive as other companies in the European Union. Thus, there is a high chance of many of them becoming uncompetitive and closing down. The European Union also has strict regulations on agriculture, so the country will be forced to adopt such regulations, which might cost a lot of money to do so. It is also worth mentioning that joining the European Union could accelerate brain drain, considering that it would be much easier for the citizens to get employed in the other European Union countries. Hey, thank you for watching the video. If you have liked the video, please subscribe so you will not miss out on our future uploads.